Peace, Chiefs, and Deers. It's Bronzebird here with another video. Before I begin, like and subscribe. Now, before you guys go ahead and you celebrate New Year's and all this other stuff, I figured I'd give you a couple of videos or give you a couple of thoughts on my mind to square this off. I really wanted to have this conversation for a while, and I even mentioned it on a stream before that, us as so-called Black men, it would be nice to see if we have any shows where the main lead protagonists are so-called Black men. And this was a roaming thought around my mind. This is just surface level, surface conversations. I'm not expecting to get deep and doing a whole entire analysis about this. This is just for good old commentary. And in my ideas, I think that there's a lot of reasons why so-called Black men cannot be protagonists, or there's going to be a less likelihood where you're going to have so-called Black men be protagonists in shows, especially if you want to refer to the dating life of a so-called Black man and the so-called red pill, type of thing. You know what I mean? So I understand that the brother is going to be mentioning, there's a brother that I'm going to be reading his tweets later on in this video, where he's going to be explaining and doing research on all these shows, particularly from the 90s, where there was protagonists that was primarily so-called Black men. I know someone named the Wayne brothers, for example, and Martin. And there's a lot of reasons why they wouldn't allow so-called Black men to have a show. But in this video, I'm just going to be reviewing, making my commentary along the way. So, Pete.
All right, so listen, it's TGIF people. I'm waiting for these topics. Let's jump on into it. Y'all ready?
Let's do it.
All right, now this week on Cocktails with Queens, we kicked off the show and talked about the cultural impact of Issa Rae's hit series Insecure. And former Fox Soul host Mike Hill brought up a good point on social media regarding the topic. Mike posted in a series of tweets about how there have been several shows about positive Black women and their relationships with each other, and asked if there were any successful shows that highlighted educated Black men. Mike also clarified that this is not a discussion about why Black women and not Black men. It's more like, why not both? I thought that was a good point.
And before she begins, there's a lot of reasons in my mindset and why I think that is. Number one, living in the so-called white rulership. Of course, he wants the representation of the so-called Black woman to be higher over the so-called Black man, just like he makes the so-called Black community. And I really do say so-called when I say this. The fact of the matter is that the so-called Black woman is supposed to be over the so-called Black man. And the so-called Black men, you brothers, is at the lowest of the low totem pole. So why would he want to see, and I'm not talking about Mike Hill, but I'm talking about the so-called white rulership. Why would he want to see any success of the so-called Black man? Unless, of course, he is giving into any of the agendas that the so-called white man or the so-called white rulership is giving into. And I don't like to be the one to go ahead and use that term, so the white man or this, that, and the third. I'm just giving a realistic view on the fact of the matter, we are under the rulership of the so-called white man. So we can't really get mad about the fact of the matter, like, this, that, and the third. But I'm just saying that because it's a lot of thoughts that go into this. The fact of the matter, the success rate of so-called Black women being in college or uprooting things like feminism and this, that, and the third, it goes along to the agenda of what they want in this society. There's a lot of reasons why. And I mean, of course, they have Insecure, there's that show Harlem Now, and a couple of other shows, but it starts to make sense to me why. You understand? So-called Black men are supposed to be uplifted for everything else. Sports, music, and all these different things, usually the detriment of a so-called Black man.
You agree with Mike's point, and why do you think Black men are not getting the same representation when it comes to television shows?
It's funny. I think largely in part that men are not entertaining. I think, you know what I'm saying? When I think about an ensemble situation, I'll never forget Carlos King said one time, I asked him about an ensemble reality TV show about men, like why aren't there any? And he was just like, Q, plainly put, men are boring.
Well, that's a lie. Well, I don't believe anything this guy Funky Deneva says, and I mean he would appear, or it makes it seem like I would give the inquiry on maybe it's true, maybe it's not true, that he's a homosexual so-called black man. But even with that being said, of course there could be shows for men, regardless of gender, where it's not quote unquote boring. So I definitely disagree with that opinion. How could we say that men are not entertaining when every day people are sitting up there watching basketball? Why is it that you have more people who's geared into watching the NBA and not the WNBA? So how could men be boring? And then over that, of course, let's go over the shows in the 90s. The Wayne Brothers was a good show. Wayne Brothers was about two single men living in Harlem, co-owning a restaurant with their pops. Then they went ahead and invested in a newsstand, and they was able to make business from there. That was a positive upliftment of so-called black men owning a business via comedy. Then, of course, you have Martin, that whole show that came out in 1992. The show In the House with LL Cool J that came out in 1994. So I don't want to hear this whole entire nonsense rhetoric about men are just frankly boring in entertainment. That is a lot entertaining, not entertaining. That's frankly a lie. I don't believe that at all. And it doesn't matter what sexuality is. This is why I just want to make that clear. And this is not hate speech, but I just want to make that clear. That is absolutely not true. And especially if you're talking about this era, they're going to be mentioning the show Real Husbands of Hollywood, which I don't really want to put in a category either, because of the fact of the matter that is a derivative of the Real Housewives. They just made a male version. And because I understand it comes from BET, BET is so corny. BET Network has been copying shows for I don't know how long. They're not original. You remember the show College Hill, which basically was just a bootleg version of the Real World, but they made it all about college between so-called black people, and then it was one so-called white cast member. Like, give me a break. And also, I just want to say this before he continues. It's not the fact of the matter that men are boring. It's also the fact of the matter, this is the era and time where they are vilifying men. You have to deal with the Me Too era. You have to deal with the whole entire thing that men have to follow behind the whimsical nature of the agendas in this society. So if it's a man that's really talking about women on his show and he's a single man, it's going to be hard for him, and it's going to be a hard pitch to throw out there, because these shows are going to be, warred against. Basically, they're going to have a lot of women, particularly, and then probably a few men that's going to say, oh, well, he's exhibiting patriarchy. He's exhibiting toxic masculinity and all these different things. So, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why there cannot be, or there might not be, a representation of so-called black men in particular on having a sitcom, a dramedy, a drama, or this, that, and the third in today's era of the television era.
You know what I'm saying? So I think that could be part of the reason, trying to come up with the creative. I mean, would people watch an all male living single? Would we?
You're right. Well, I agree.
I disagree. I disagree wholeheartedly about this. Of course, they would watch all men. Black women, of course, love looking at beautiful black men on television. I think it's quite clear that the big media houses have.
Well, so-called black women at large would like looking at so-called black men when they simp for a so-called black woman. Okay, when you have shows like Girlfriends, or you have that show back in the day, Soul Food, or this, that, and the third, and they have all these great little relationships. You Are My Queen, singing to Next from 1999 and Donnell Jones and all this other stuff, man. Like, it's a different era and time. The so-called black man waking up to the demise of the so-called black woman. How did, like, so-called black women want to just be appeased to know that the so-called black man is still simping for her? So, no, I call a big cap when it comes to that.
Have told us that they're not going to invest in black positivity when it comes to black men, and that's why there are no shows. Let me tell you, if they start to put money into black man ensembles, then we will show up and watch it. But media has made billions of dollars watching and creating toxic, negative black male plight scenarios on television. The prison shows, the crime shows, everything is surrounding the bad black man, if you ask my opinion. But this is the real question, soulmates. Let me see some thumbs up in the comments. If you saw a positive black male ensemble, right, of men doing positive things and adding women as they do into the equation, if you were watching that. I want to see some thumbs up.
It's BS, if you ask me.
We're waiting.
Here's
You know,
my point.
I think it's a case of, again, it's what came first, the chicken or the egg.
Mhm.
Yeah, you can say that there's an agenda against promoting positive black men, and that there's some truth to that. But let me tell you something, don't nothing come before money and greed when it comes to these networks. I feel that they thought there was an audience for it, they damn sure would produce it. And every time we complain about there's not enough programs that show us in a positive light, and then someone tries to do it, like look at reality shows. The most ratchet are the ones that stay on. And then we have these beautiful positive reality shows that show positive friendships. The Empire Girls with Jaleesa and Adrian Balan, the Tia and Tamara show, positive, pro-family. They last for a few minutes, and then people get bored because no one's getting cussed out. Unfortunately,
Well, that would go to the narrative that drama sells. Drama and sex sells. So, of course, there's a reason why they have these reality shows with primarily women to go on there and act the way they do and act like fools and sit up there and bring in storylines that's not true. And you know what I found was amazing, honestly, the other day? I was looking at something, I guess, on, I believe, Media Takeout, where there was this guy, that guy Safari, who I did a video on, in which he was talking about how he didn't like how the cameraman was capturing him in a certain scene on the show. So he had to redo the scene, or they had to do different outtakes to the scene itself. Now, I want y'all to ask me this question. If this is a so-called reality show, why would they have to recapture a scene in order to make it authentic to his liking? That's something I've always wondered, because that would give on to the idea that these reality shows is absolutely fake. We understand this already. But going back to the point that Claudia Jordan is making, I will say that at the end of the day, drama does sell. Of course, they want the family and, you know, kissy, hug, but at the end of the day, who doesn't want to watch a television show with women that sit up there pulling on each other's hair and calling them the B word and the H word and all these sex scandals and this, that, and the third, letting them go all in about the 7 sins. That's what all it represents. So, I mean, obviously, we all have an understanding, whether you want to get deep or you just want to be at the surface level. We understand what sells and what doesn't sell. But now going to the men's perspective, Tyler Perry could have sat there and came out with a show for so-called black men. But of course, if it's coming out with something about so-called black men, there's always these underlying, and no lie when I say this, homosexual tendencies in these shows. This is another video I did on that, where a so-called black man is sitting up there talking about he likes to get his butt tickled. It's like these people is openly practicing odontology.
consumer controls, I think, they're gonna put more money into. Our track record doesn't show that we'll support that.
Listen, if you put money, if networks put money behind positive black images, then we will follow. We're consumers for a reason.
That's a lie. And I'm going to say that's a lie. I don't believe that 100%. So-called black people do have the power to sit up there and vote with their remotes, vote with their keyboard, because we're living in an era where a lot of people is abandoning cable. We're starting to go ahead and use the internet as our main source of entertainment. So to sit here and tell me we will follow it and this, that, and third, yeah, it's good for a while. It has a good meaning, but they're going to turn to, what does it denote? Is there any drama? Is there anybody arguing? Is there any beefs between two people? So of course, that whole entire thing about seeing the positive so-called black man as positive so-called black woman, there's two sides to every story. There's two flips to a coin. I can believe what he's saying is true. so-called Black people do want to see a positive image of themselves, but I also could say at the end of the day, they're going to be turned off by it by a certain point. And then they're going to want to go back to watching all of these shows that's denoting cursing and denoting all these bad stuff attributed to so-called Black people.
And we can be trained and taught on what to like and what not to like. We've been trained and taught to like Black dysfunction on television. That's why we moved.
Well, then again, that also can denote the idea of cognitive dissonance. You knowing that it's wrong, but you still want to partake and participate in the nonsense. So no, I don't 100% agree, but that's just something I think about. There's cognitive dissonance. You can ask somebody right now, and especially because the reason they create more of these shows for women, of course, because it's more of the viewership. They depend on the woman. They understand the market for women is more better for women than it is for men. That's something I also meant to mention.
Away from stuff like The Cosby Show and Living Single to reality-based nonsense. It's simple and it's easy. If you put money around chaos and ignorance, then people are going to show up to get the money and create the content.
What was that Kevin Hart show, The Real Hollywood Husbands?
Yes, they're coming back too. They're renamed it.
I didn't watch it. I'm not a huge Kevin Hart fan, but how did that do?
I mean,
that's coming back for another season, and,
right.
and people like that show, but it's also a very talented group of writers and very, you know what I mean? Like their writers are really, really good.
Yeah, when you have it on BET, the network that's known for sitting up there copying and remixing original show ideas and then sitting up there talking about this is the new show. Like I always believe, BET is a corny ass network, and I don't give a damn they want to sit up there and talk about it's Black entertainment. That nonsense is owned by a so-called white man. I don't care what you say. So the so-called white man is allowed to sit up there and give you Negroes a show that's not an original idea, that's a copy of another show, and then sit up there and talk about this is the culture. You're being bamboozled into believing that BET, at any fact of the matter, is going to go ahead and do something positive for so-called Black people or even have an original show. And I don't care what nobody says. I dare someone to tell me The Real Husbands of Hollywood is an original show idea. It isn't. You name any show on BET that is not a copy of another show. Name them, please.
And they're funny, and they're not super squeaky clean either. You know?
Well, the writers for Insecure are really, really good. The writers for Living Single are really, really good. Assign great writers and directors and actors to an all-male ensemble of Black men doing great things, and it's going to be really good content. You just got to figure out how to engage the public in this case, because we're used to seeing things that are not positive and we rah-rah that. We just have to change the narrative a little bit. And there are ways to do that in creating content.
You mean changing the narrative for a complete society where you have to abide by a lot of these so-called agendas that's in the workings right now. That's why I say again, it's not always that. Brother makes a good point. I won't sit up there and say he doesn't, but you know, we have to understand this era and time, you're on thin ice for certain things that you say. If I was to sit up there and be a public figure and I say the things that I say on this YouTube channel, someone would sit up there and eat my ass up, okay? They would sit up there and roast me to shame and sit up there and say that I'm exhibiting some type of toxic masculinity and exhibiting some type of detrimental behavior in which I'm bashing so-called Black women or bashing women as a whole, or I'm an incel or a red pill monster or some nonsense like that. You understand? So it's a lot, man. It's a lot.
I'm so sick on my point. I think if there was money in it, that they would do it. There's nothing that's going to stop the greed and the love of money.
So now I want to show you quickly the tweets that the brother had decided to put up and have a conversation about the TV shows, in which, you know, I come to the realization I kind of have an understanding, nor do I care about what Hollywood is doing, because Hollywood is going to be always the one to reign supreme and putting in whatever shows they want you to see, okay? So this is the brother tweet right here. I'm trying to go up to where everybody made their whole entire stance on it. So this is from December 30th. I just want to read this a couple on down. The iconic shows revolving around Black women are exceptional, and I've always supported them and want more made. When I mentioned them, I was only using them as an example of that excellent and asking, had we ever had any similar shows with Black men as the nucleus? By that I mean, at least one where the top two stars on the show were professional, positive Black men, and the nucleus / storylines revolve around them. I also asked for shows that actually lasted at least 4 years, meaning they were really supported. I got a few good examples, such as Sanford and Son, Malcolm and Eddie, and that's cool. I'm doing research. Bringing up the women's shows wasn't about saying they got theirs, what about ours? It was about a standard of greatness to consider when giving the answer. I want women to win. If you've seen any show I've been on, I go hard for women, especially Black women. They've set the standard. Johnson, Grand Crew, and Bruh are exceptional examples of these shows for Black men. Let's support them and more Black women shows like Harlem, so more are made. Once again, I understand you can't read into context or tone in a tweet, and sometimes 146 characters aren't enough to spell out plainly what you mean, but I never want to divide. I only want to bring us together. We all need one another. This is the last I'll say about it. And in my opinion, I guess this would refer to me the IDGAF narrative I like to pull along and stream. So-called Black women understand their mindset. They do not value the so-called Black man at large. So a so-called Black man daring to push the envelope and have a conversation about which shows would be appropriate, or to have more so-called Black men shows, of course, is going to come with a lot of tongue thrashing and a lot of Twitter fingering. Okay. And this is not about being a gender divide, like the brother said. I don't do gender divides. I'm about the truth. We have an understanding of what the society is about and what the narratives are supposed to be driven in society, especially when it comes to shows. So otherwise than that, this is just a surface level commentary. Give your thoughts in the comment section. Peace.